Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future
Order
results.
submitted.
So stressful when the world's on fire. Good God. I can't look at this, guys. Like, my strategy is you buy it and you hope that you got a good spot. Yeah, but we all think you're crazy. You don't fight this. No way. The markets are freaking out and you don't think that anything is wrong? Come back tomorrow and I'll lose it all. Should be fun.
Good morning, guys. I'm sorry. I took way too long to eat. Oh, here's Uzi complaining about it. Octavius should start streaming. He would probably be on team. He should. Now, I tell you what. I will give Octavius the stream key and everything. He can start the stream. And I can just, like, come in through, you know, voice chat or something later. Something like that. That would be perfectly fine. Well, you know what? Today I think is going to be an interesting day, especially for the S&P 500, because we've had a really good week. Let's come in and look at the charts here. So, well, let's start with the S&P 500, okay? So, yeah, between yesterday and Tuesday, that's, you know, and then there was a little bit of a gap on Wednesday. We've had a pretty good up week. And then, you know, we've almost recovered all of the chaos from, you know, what did we call it? Liberation Day? So we're in an interesting place, but, you know, how dedicated are these orders? I kind of suspect that some of this is like short covering and like repositioning. I'm not really seeing like conviction with these positions. I'm not really seeing like the liquidity coming back. And so I kind of suspect that this is a dead cat bounce and that we will have another decline. I'm not saying that it's going to make a lower low or anything like that, but I do suspect that we should see another decline. And today might be a good test, because if it is a dead cat bounce, you're probably going to see pretty lackluster activity going into the close. But you know, like, I don't think that I'm super dedicated to that theory, because today could just be like a gangbusters day, right? Well, over here in the treasuries, the yields continue to come off, and now that things are kind of like cooling off, we're just a skip away from the weekly high, 18.5. So now that things have calmed down, interest rates are coming down, because I think that the real driver for the interest rates being as high as they were was people concerned about inflation from tariffs. All right. Let's see what else we got going on. Oil on the downturn again this morning, as is gold, although that's still, I'd say, within its range here that it's starting to form. Silver kind of actually holding the higher end of its range, but copper is down. So might have something to do with China. Here is the Japanese yen. The Japanese yen coming back. So the treasuries and the yen are diverging here. Kind of important to note. And Bitcoin continues to push up and is up above 95,000. That, you know, when we were here, was like, okay, here, that's pretty good. But this on a Friday is looking good. But let's see where they're at on Monday, because Bitcoin always does weird things over the weekend, right? I complain because if you do, you start, yeah. Well, you know what is like, so I'm making breakfast, and I'm looking at the time, and I finished making my breakfast at 6:20, which is when I would prefer to be at the desk, right? But I'm like, okay, that gives me 10 minutes to eat, so I start eating. And then I get here and it's 6:35 and I'm like, what the hell, Seth? Like, sometimes I will start eating and I will just zone out. Like, that's the ADHD. So, yeah, that's basically my excuse. Is tomorrow's Pope funeral affecting the market? I would doubt that. But I do think that it being Friday and having had a pretty good week for the S&P 500 and markets still being a little bit unsure if this is like a dead cat bounce or not, I think is going to be kind of the decider today, right? Because if you just believe the price, then Donald Trump has backed off on the trade wars and everything will be fine now. Everything will go back to the way it was. But I don't think it's so simple. Trump and most EU leaders will meet suddenly and Zelensky will be there. Trump wants an Iran deal, but will be, quote, leading the pack for war without one. Oh, that's a little bit of an alarming statement. Because I really don't think they can get a deal with Iran. Iran's red lines were basically the only things that the US was interested in negotiating for. If those are all red lines for Iran, then there is just absolutely zero way that they can make a deal. I think today is going to be geopolitical discussion, isn't it? Well, let's talk about what Vital said first. AOC most likely will be the next candidate for president. Just saw a recent marketing campaign. It sure feels to me like that she has kind of been running a media blitz. I mean, ever since she got in, she's been doing that. And now she's been doing like a tour. She's been doing she's kind of following Donald Trump's template. So like you go around and you have these huge rallies everywhere. So I kind of do think that she wants to run for president. And I'm not going to say that she's the most likely, but I think that she probably stands a decent shot at becoming president on the Democrat side, because who else have they got? If they're smart, probably they go with Ben Shapiro, right? But I'm kind of wondering if the anti-Semitism over there is hard enough that he wouldn't be able to win. Yeah, they're polishing her presentation up. But I think that the issue, though, is that, I mean, man, this is just kind of a wild thing to think about, isn't it? Because I really do not think that she has decision-making chops whatsoever, right? She is a politician in the mold of a social media politician, and she is following in the footsteps of a social media president, Donald Trump, right? But the difference is that Donald Trump, his whole experience before he became a social media star was being an executive, and AOC has no such experience of that nature. And so I think that like if for instance it was like AOC versus JD Vance, all other things being equal, or rather like all other things being equal to like what they are today, I think that JD Vance would just absolutely whip her, because she would appear so unserious next to him. Because JD has a really good understanding of what's going on and is very, very articulate. And what's happening now, they're teaching him how to make decisions and how to run things. By the I think there's a very, very good chance that JD Vance will be the Republican nominee after Trump, and he'll be a very strong candidate. I don't know if some of these other people will come back, like Rand Paul. Who's the senator from Texas? I can't even remember his name yet. Yeah. Let's see here. AOC and Bernie are populist left. If they dump the culture war stuff, they'd shatter the Trump base. Well, so I think it's a little bit more than just that they have to dump the culture war shift. A lot of Trump's base is populist and basically left, but minus the contentious culture war stuff. Yeah, but I guess the thing is, the reason why I would say that it's a little bit deeper than that is because when we think about the culture war stuff, we think about, why are you trying to force trans women into sports and all of these sorts of things, right? The woke stuff. But the thing is that the woke stuff is just a natural extension of their deeper philosophy, So okay, let me approach this as a different way, because I kind of, not that you guys have said anything, but as I'm saying it, I'm kind of like, I don't know if this is a very effective explanation. I don't think that I'm convincing anybody with this explanation. So let me back up. I kind of feel like that Kamala Harris kind of avoided the culture war stuff. Kamala Harris, when she became the nominee, was her whole thing was basically like, hey guys, I am not a raving mad lunatic leftist like I've been portraying myself for years and years and years. I'm actually a centrist. And all of these things like trans women and women's sports, and I don't know, that's always the first one that comes to mind, because I think that's like the most extreme example. But those were not a part of her campaign. And she still did poorly, right? Because the issue is like, everybody understands that all of that woke stuff is just the kind of the natural evolution of their deeper belief system. That there is systemic oppression, and that we have to elevate those that have been traditionally oppressed in order to overcome that. But what does the right do when it runs into the fact that anti-Semitism arguments are rhetorically near identical to woke shit? I am not sure where you're going with that. But I'll let you keep going, and I'm sure it'll probably become more clear to me what you mean. Most parties in the West are populist now, on the mainstream left as well. Well, yeah, there's populist, but this is maybe part of why I push the efficient market hypothesis's bunk stuff, because I really believe that at the heart of all of our societal problems is the unquestioning devotion to the idea that the market is always right. The problems that we have today, I was watching the TikTok, and they were talking about how young men are trending conservative, right? And they were also talking about that, like, the labor, like the social contract with labor is falling apart, because CEOs and people that are hiring, they're like, why does nobody want to work? Well, the people do want to work, but just not for the pay that you're offering them. And so companies are having a really, really hard time getting their workers to really focus and like work with urgency when it's needed. And why is that? because the workers know that that's not going to change anything for them. They're going to work and expend all of this extra effort, and they're not going to get rewarded for it. Right? More of the economy is going to capital at the expense of labor. And the mechanism through which that transfer is happening is the stock market. They are paying workers less so that they can transfer more of that money to shareholders. Right? And what you're seeing now is just, the market isn't perfectly efficient, but when an imbalance exists for long enough, it will correct itself. And so workers are seeing that, and their response is not working as hard. I guarantee you go in and you pay your workers more, and you do the things that really shows the workers that you care about them. You don't just lay off half your workforce willy-nilly. Okay? The workers will reward you. I'm hoping that we go into an era where things like mass layoffs hurts your stock. That investors start to realize, oh, okay, we can't get the return that we used to because labor costs are so high. But we kind of still, you're going to do better with the companies that are treating their employees the best. And so then all of the investors start flocking to those companies that are treating their workers the best. And I can only hope. But that's kind of the sort of the thing that's going on right now. And all of that is a consequence of us completely accepting this idea that the market is always right. The funny thing is that the woke people kind of had the solution to it correct. Is just that they decided to go on an issue that they were just completely dead wrong about. But their strategy was, okay, so if the market doesn't do what we want it to do on its own, what we need to do is we need to create new incentive structures to incentivize the market to do what we want. And so they created these funds and did all of these things that would reward companies for doing the woke things that they wanted them to do. And it worked. It worked. It's just that, it worked in that it got companies to do woke stuff. It's just that doing woke stuff was a bad idea. And the public is rejecting it. Right? And that's why I believe that the left has a bigger problem here, because what truly is the basis of the left right now? Bernie is woke, or sorry, let me start over. Yeah, Bernie is populist, but I don't really think that that's what drives the left right now. I think that what drives the left right now is a rejection of the social structure that their parents grew up in. And embracing a world where most women work and you don't necessarily get married and all of these sorts of things, right? And I think that the society is going the other way. I think that what's happening is people are seeing this hellscape that we've created and are basically like, no, this sucks. I think that it would be better if we went back to more traditional ways of thinking. And in fact, I think that what you might start to see happen is that they will go like way even further than that. People will be like, no, it's not that we need to make America like it was in the 1950s. Like, we need to go back to like caveman times where there's a village and you're all living. I really think in the long run, that's where people are kind of heading. because they're just so unsatisfied with with their social lives now, you know. Okay. What does the right do when it runs into the fact that anti-Semitism arguments are rhetorically nearly identical to woke stuff? The right treats a Jewish like woke treats. Insert oppressed identity group. So now you have this fermentation of a legitimately anti-Semitic movement as opposed to simply an anti-Zionist one that's proving to be a challenge for the left and the right, just worse for the right because the mainstream dialectic traditionally associates the right with racism, anti-Semitism, etc. Woke is just about creating oppressed identities to use and leveraging power structures. Intersectionality is just combining minority identities to create synthetic minority identities to chase the aforementioned goat, leveraging power dynamics. Jews are basically the ultimate minority worldwide, hence the right approach them the same way. It will, but the thing that's unique about the Jewish, I mean, there's a number of minorities that actually kind of fit this pattern and cause big problems for the left, right? Is that there are minorities that were historically oppressed and are doing really well right now. Okay, Jewish people were historically oppressed. They've been very successful. Asian people were historically oppressed in the United States, at least. They were. There was very, very much anti-Asian sentiment here in the United States. So much so that we put them in internment camps. It's like crazy to think about. And that wasn't that long ago. Asians were historically oppressed. They're doing really, really great right now. Mormons were historically oppressed. They are doing really well right now. And so kind of what happens is the left will say, okay, here's a historically oppressed person or a group, but they are lower on the hierarchy, right? And then if that historically oppressed group is actually doing really, really well right now, then you get put on the enemy list, right? So as a response to the rise of anti-Semitic right, you have a divide where the more disaffected liberals who drifted to the right are calling them the woke right for trying to foster racially conscious whites, creating a new rift on the right. I'm not sure what you're talking about there because I haven't seen that at all. What I see is that online there's a small group of anti-Semitic people on the right that have an outsized effect on the conversation, but it's really only like a dozen people. There's a warfare of class going on, and my class rich is winning. Well, I don't know if that's actually true though. Video Starcade, like, so the thing that's interesting is about the development of class in America is that the middle class is kind of disappearing, right? There's not like a lower class, a working class, the middle class, middle upper class, and then upper class. There's basically like there's an upper class, there's a middle upper class, and then there's everybody else now, right? And is that because the upper class is conducting warfare against the other classes and are quote unquote winning? I think that's one way of presenting it, but I think that that's a way of presenting it that doesn't really help you, doesn't actually bring a solution, because if that's what you believe is happening, then what is your solution going to be? Oh, well, we need to bring down that upper class and give more of that to everybody else. We need to tear down the upper class and bring it to everybody else, which is basically like what most leftist thought is right now. So we need to take the people that are having success right now and we need to knock them down a notch, and then everybody else can do better, right? But what will happen if you do that is the reason those people are so rich is because the things that they did brought value to the economy. It might not be justified. Like this whole idea, like Jeff Bezos. Okay, does it really make sense for somebody to be worth billions of dollars? Well, they don't have it in cash. It's in stocks, right? So the reality is Jeff Bezos isn't that rich. He's not as rich as that number says. Really, that stuff belongs to Amazon, and he probably never sells it. But I digress. If you come and you cut him down a notch, he did create a lot of jobs. Like if Amazon didn't exist, man, think about how many people, like how many small businesses that just wouldn't be making it right now if it wasn't for Amazon, right? Like so much goes through Amazon. The reality of the situation is that Amazon has created wealth. It created wealth out of nothing, probably more so than almost any other company that I can think of. So if you come in and you tear down Jeff Bezos, and as a result you tear down Amazon, the result is not going to be more prosperity for everybody else. The result is just going to be that our nation is less wealthy, right? So how do we, how should we think about it? How does Seth think that we should think about it? I think that the way that we need to think about it is that we have a system, and the system results in certain incentives and disincentives, and that results in certain optimal strategies and affects the way that people behave. And right now, the system is set up in a way that really gives an advantage to executives and kind of disadvantages everybody else. So what do we have to do to fix that? Instead of taking these people and pulling them down, what we need to do is we need to create a system that provides more incentives to those people at the bottom, right? So one of those things is that we need to change the culture. We need to understand that the market isn't already always right, and the markets are not informationally efficient. Let's go and look at some of the scientific research and realize that treating your employees well helps your company, and laying employees off willy-nilly generally hurts your company long-term. All of the studies that we have on like the effects of layoffs says that it hurts the company. It helps the company's stock price in the short term, but like there's real long-term damage done to these companies from that, right? That's one big one that I think is directly relevant to what's going on. I'm not even sure that we have to create rules and things that would incentivize that. I kind of think that as people understand the truth, that they will adjust their behavior to do what is best for them in the long run, right? That's one way. The other thing that I think that we're going to see, or that we should see, is that we need to empower people and make it easier for them to start businesses. It's very difficult to start a business right now. Do you know that like of people that start their own business, that like 70% of them do it unwillingly or because they have no other choice? like there's a very few of those people that actually like come out of school and are like, well, I want to become a business owner and I'm going to do absolutely everything that I have to do to just do that and try and eventually get it. No, usually it's that their situation is as such that like starting their own business is their only viable alternative at that time, and they go down that path. Okay. So, and part of that is there's a lot of safety in working for a company, but part of it is also that it sucks owning a business. It's hard to get it started, and there's all these other things, right? So what are we actually doing? We are empowering people at the bottom to create wealth, because in my opinion, Right now, we have a world where the value of executives, the executives are basically able to generate more money than everybody else. And that's why, the market is, going in that direction. It's like you have to make strategic decisions, and those strategic decisions are like the most valuable thing. And meanwhile, when you get to workers like labor, there's so much labor that their labor is worth practically nothing in the world stage. And that's why the bottom part, they're not getting rewarded at all, and the executives are getting rewarded a ton. But I think that there's a very good chance that in our lifetimes, okay, hold on, I didn't hear what the news squawk said, but there was a headline there, and the market's definitely reacted to it. I think that Donald Trump is saying some things. Okay, he was talking to reporters, but his remarks are done, and I kind of do think that the market reaction here was a little bit muted, so I don't know if it's a huge deal, but let's keep a close eye on it. All right, anyways, I think in the near future that could completely flip on its head. I think that we might run into a situation where running a large corporation becomes an absolute nightmare and very, very difficult to generate, really good revenue from it. And small businesses will become the huge profit-generating centers. I think that we're very close to a deal with Japan. Okay, I think one of the big things that's going on is AI. I tell you what, and this is something that, I think that it says more about us. Like this whole thing that people are concerned that these tech oligarchs will basically just control all of AI, and the people that advocate for basic universal income, right? The reason they're saying that we should have basic universal income is because they say the robots will take all of our jobs, and there will only be a few people that are actually making money because they control all of the existing resources, and they'll just pay robots for everything, and then the rest of us won't be able to do anything. I think that says a lot about a person's worldview, because I really, when I look at the systems, because my approach is, let's look at the systems and see all the small little micro interactions and see how that can lead to higher level emergent behavior. I think that the emergent behavior that we're going to see out of AI is that people are going to realize that they don't need the corporation to do things. That one person can be a corporation. And so we're going to start to see businesses and corporations that are doing things that a big, huge company like Google does, but is being run by very, very few people. And there will just be an explosion in businesses like this, where it'll get to the point where practically everybody has their own small business or side hustle that they're pushing. That's where I kind of see things going. And so I think that to prepare for this, that we should be looking at how we can support that. Like right now, if I want to give people a share in my business, very hard to do. Yeah, you can't make a business that's like traded on the stock. There's all these regulatory hurdles that you have to jump through that are actually quite difficult to jump through, right? But I would like to see a world where somebody can just decide that weekend, okay, we're going to start a company. They do all of this stuff, and within a week they could potentially be listed on an exchange somewhere and people investing in them. That's where I see the future going, right? That would solve income inequality, not tearing the rich down. You see? Trump today tried to end congressional stock trading. Okay. So something to pay attention to, okay? if they end congressional stock trading, I'm almost guarantee you that the next step will be, one, the aides and other people will start to make more, because that's what they were. I mean, that's why the senators are doing it, is because they saw their aides and so forth doing it. Okay, or they will start selling the information. Like if you have a buddy who's a senator and they'll say, hey, I'll tell you what to invest in if you give me X amount of money, they'll just sell it. And that might provide opportunities for you. You happen to know a senator, so. I wouldn't say that Jeff Bezos created it out of nothing. Even Bezos said it was super easy to him because the framework had already been laid. Well, when I say out of nothing, I mean that value was created that didn't exist before. Obviously, you had to invest existing resources into it. But, you know, it's not like, you know, like a person's traditional conception of wealth is like mining gold. I put all of this work into mining gold and it created this resource, and then I can turn around and I can sell that resource, and it came from somewhere, right? But the economy, you know, just doing transactions has value. Doing services, the work itself has value, and so you can grow the economy without actually increasing the amount of things that are there, simply because the things that you're doing are more efficient. And that's basically what Amazon is. Amazon is a dramatic increase in efficiency for selling items from small businesses. You got to agree with me, though, that taxes on the poor should not be taxed so heavily while the very wealthy pay little to no taxes at all. So I really don't think that the tax structure really does a whole lot. So the left's whole argument is that all of these problems are due to that we don't tax the rich enough. And I don't believe that that's accurate. So again, all you're doing is you're creating incentives for the rich to try and preserve their capital and everything, right? But you're not doing anything to provide incentives for people to create more wealth. So it wouldn't solve the problem. And the big issue is that all of the wealth that you're concerned about, that you're talking about, is all held in the stock market. So you really can't access that wealth without hurting the stock market and hurting everybody. So increasing capital gains taxes is not going to do it. Or these other like super crazy ideas like taxing unrealized capital gains and things like that. In my opinion, like one of the best changes they could make to the tax system is that anybody that makes less than $200,000 a year net pays no capital gains tax. That would, if you didn't pay any capital gains tax, that would be a huge incentive for every middle-class person in the United States to start their own business. Because if you can take advantage of all of the breaks that come from business, but then you don't have to pay taxes on the profit unless you're making over a certain amount, you'd have to be almost dumb not to take advantage of it. As long as the interest rates were low enough. Selling information is illegal? No, it's not. Selling what do we call it? Selling non-public information is illegal. Sure. Selling non-public information is illegal. But we're talking about public information. It's information that's considered public, but the funny thing is that the definition of public information is not information that the public has. Yeah, it would be a huge boost to the economy. No capital gains tax on greater than 200,000, or on gains less than 200,000. So this is a thing where I don't know why so few people understand this, but people think that the definition of public information is information that I don't have access to. Like if I, a regular person, don't have access to it, then people shouldn't be allowed to trade on it. People shouldn't be allowed to sell that information, etc., etc., etc. But the reality is that if that was the rule, like markets would not work. There would be like no point in having markets. Actually, the whole thing about markets is to provide people an incentive to bring that information, to trade on that information. We don't have access to the futures markets because they were trying to be nice to us, right? It's because there's a certain clientele that needs to be serviced, and they need liquidity, and that's why we're given access to it, right? But the market was created for that information transfer, or rather, I'm not going to say that that's why it was created, but that is the function that it serves. That is the thing that makes all this work. This is the thing that like communism could not reproduce or evolve. I think it's kind of funny. One of the arguments that a lot of people make is that they're like, well, okay, maybe communism doesn't work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that capitalism is the only way. And can't there be like this third other way that's even better than both of those? And I think that that's a really effective argument in those kinds of conversations, because the person arguing in favor of capitalism, like all they can say is, well, maybe it does exist. It's just that we haven't found it yet, right? Well, the issue with communism, in my view, is that they were trying to solve the wrong problem, right? But his whole thing was labor doesn't get paid enough, and capital is basically stealing the value from labor, and so we, the government, are going to come in and we're going to own the means of production so that it can just all go to the workers. That was socialism, communism, right? But the real issue in the economy is balancing the competing supply and demand, and the market is the way that we have that information transfer between those two forces. And there has to be an incentive for them to come together and to transfer that information, and the market provides that. And because communism didn't realize that that was the real issue, right? They aren't able to come up with some alternative solution, right? You have to have some other way of incentivizing people to come with the information that they have about supply and demand. Now, when you put it into that perspective, then it's kind of like, well, but how would you do that? Because to be honest, I'm really not sure that there is another way. It's just because they have to provide an incentive for people to come to the market, and I would say it has to be decentralized. There's no other way to do it. You have to have a market. So now that you understand you have to have a market, then the question is just like, how do we structure the market that's best for us? So it is capitalism. It's just that like maybe the current form of capitalism that we have has kind of gone off the rails. What's your favorite futures product to trade and why? It's definitely the 10-year treasury. So the 10-year treasury is economically sensitive. So there's lots of news events and opportunities for you to make money based off of your knowledge of the markets. There are lots of consistent flows, things like buying and selling that has to happen every month that you can potentially take advantage of. It also kind of solves like one of the bigger problems, because most people, they're going to go over here and trade the equity indexes and they'll do amazing. And then a period of volatility like we just had here comes along and completely wipes them out. The leverage is too much and they get completely wiped out. And because when the markets become illiquid, these instruments move so fast and it just tears you up, right? But in the 10-year treasury, not only is it moved slower, so you have time to make your decisions and you can actually do things even when it's getting super, super wild. But when it goes super, super wild, you get really good, solid, easy to predict uptrends. So being able to trade the 10-year treasury is a skill that I think every futures trader should have. Most of the things that people are trading are the things where they probably have the least ability to build an actual hedge in them. Like equity indexes, I think for swing trades, equity indexes, it can be great, right? Because you can come in and you can say, hey, Donald Trump, he's going to have Liberation Day. I want to sell ahead of Liberation. There's a lot of risk involved in that. But if you have a large enough account and you can swing E-minis, man, you could have made so much money on that drop. And I think that that's a play that lots of people would have made if they had the ability to. Many people that kind of knew what was going to happen and before the stock market actually did it, right? But scalping it, like what is the S&P 500 going to do over the next 5 minutes? Is it going to move up 10 ticks before it moves down 10 ticks? That's mostly a crapshoot, man. Most of these people, they're trying to do something that's just random and that there's no real edge in. Okay, what's the difference between TN and ZN? That's a good question. By the way, you're from Florida, you should go visit Uzi. So the way that the treasury futures work is you are delivering an actual treasury, right? When the expiration day comes, if you still hold the contract and you're short it, then that means that you're going to sell a treasury to somebody. And if you're long it, that means you're going to buy a treasury, right? And they kind of have a list of like which treasuries are eligible for delivery. And they kind of have like a range of them, okay? So ZN, the 10-year treasury, it's supposed to be, traditionally it was 10-year treasuries. But in order for there to be enough treasuries for them to deliver, they end up including treasuries all the way down to like 7 years, okay? And it just so happens that those ones that are kind of more in the 7-year range also are like the cheapest to deliver with the way that things are structured right now. So the ZN actually ends up being more like a 7-year treasury than a 10-year treasury because of the securities that are available for delivery or eligible for delivery, right? So that's why they created what we call the ultras. So that would be like UB and now TN. TN, there's less securities that are eligible for delivery, and those securities are all basically the ones that are right at 10 years. TN is not as big because that less securities that are eligible, that's less liquidity available for it. So it ends up being smaller. So where that becomes relevant is, first of all, whether you trade ZN or TN, that's not like a huge difference. I don't know. I've had a lot of you guys talk about trading it, and I've never really heard any of you like say, oh, you know, like really stuck with it and really made a compelling argument that they did better in TN than ZN. So that's the first thing. And again, it's going to have less liquidity. So for retail day traders, are probably going to do ZN. But that doesn't mean that everything that I just taught you is useless. So one thing that definitely comes up is if you're trading micro treasury yield futures, you will find some situations where the micro 10-year kind of follows ZB more closely than it does ZN. And that is because that the difference between a 7-year treasury and a 10-year treasury is like right on that hump. And so there are some situations where ZN and TN kind of behave differently, or that ZN and the micro 10-year behave a little bit differently. Been looking to add treasuries to trade along with ES and NQ. So much noise on indexes, can't trade when it is taking a step back, but so much noise, it's insane. It trends constantly, and lots of times it doesn't stay where it goes. A lot of switchbacks. Yep. Like that's the thing, is to really get like the really good trades in the equity indexes, you really have to take pretty big swings and pretty big risk. And it's usually, that's kind of like, I mean, and that's part of why the volatility is the way that it is, right? Is that the instrument is basically going to move more than what most people want it to do, essentially, right? So yeah, the swings are bigger than like what most people's stop is, so that they can't swing trade it. Because if you were willing to take like, 20, let's say 20 to 30 points adverse excursion in ES, okay, now all of a sudden you've got something where like you could potentially hold it for multiple days. Nothing funnier than seeing average Joes defending billionaire tax cuts as if that makes one. Well, I'm not saying that they should have tax cuts, but I don't, if you think that increasing the capital gains tax is going to accomplish anything, it won't. One of the things that I think is so funny is that like the big argument that they make on the taxes is like, well, if you look back to when the United States was like the most prosperous, the 60s and 70s, and you look at the tax rate then, like the tax rates were on the richest people were really, really high. And so they're kind of making this correlation. Well, okay, correlation does not imply causation. But you know why they changed those, right? They changed it because it was hampering growth. And when they got rid of it, the economy experienced tremendous growth after that. See, it's the reality is, okay, obviously you have to have taxes, right? Okay. So you can look at taxes as a percentage of the overall economy, or like really what you should look at is like government expenditures as a percent of GDP. Okay? Because inflation is a tax as well, right? And so if you just look at government income as a percentage of GDP, that doesn't reflect all of the money printing that they do and the way that they devalue our currency as well, right? Okay. But if we look at government expenditures as a percentage of GDP, you just kind of have to think of that as like, okay, that's a percentage of the GDP that kind of becomes unproductive, right? So the smaller that those government expenditures are as a percentage of GDP, the better and more efficient our economy can be, essentially. But you can't go too far, because then there's going to start, there's all sorts of negative consequences. There are things that the government does that you can't really make money from, but do have a positive benefit on society, like taking care of the homeless and things like that. Because if you don't, then that like hurts the economy. Okay, so there's like an optimal number. We don't necessarily know what that optimal number is. Kind of the thing is that it always, no matter how we change things, it always seems to go towards this number So there's like, we don't know what the optimal number would be, but we kind of know what the practical number is. Okay. So now that you know, okay, we can only take a certain percentage of the economy out as taxes in practical terms. Then the question becomes, how do we do that? Because there's multiple different ways of taxing the economy to arrive at that percentage, right? And what would actually be the best for the economy? Well, what would be the best for the economy is that the people that are creating value and are making the economy grow, that we want to take as little from them as possible. And the people that are just kind of doing it for themselves and are you know, like being gluttonous pigs, that we take as much from them as possible, right? Wouldn't that be the, you know, we basically, we don't want to tax the productive capital, but we do want to tax the unproductive capital. The people that they've got capital, but they aren't using it to grow the economy, essentially, right? But how would you do that? How would you target them? There's not, right? Because how much money somebody has is not necessarily correlated to how productive they are with that money, right? So the reality is that we don't really have a good mechanism to tax optimally, essentially, right? But what you can do is you can say these people have more than these people, and we have found, generally speaking, that the more progressive the tax system is, which is to say the more that you tax the people on top, that tends to be better for the economy. Okay? It does tend to be better for the economy. It's just that those people with capital and that are making most of their money in capital gains are really, really valuable to the economy. So you can't just increase taxes. Like, you can only tax them so much before it starts to hurt you. And I think that there's a substantial amount of evidence to say that, like, we're already at that level. You go and you look at it, like, the government income is about in line, like, as a percentage of GDP, is about in line with what it's always been. But the expenditures is just out the top. So really, like, increasing taxes on the wealthy is not really going to solve any of the problems that people are concerned about right now. What will actually help people right now? One, the government spend less and become more efficient. And two, that we provide more ways for people at the lower end of the income spectrum to produce more value for the economy. One of those would be paying people more what they're worth. I think there's a lot of situations where the free market kind of, they're able to exploit inefficiencies in the free market to pay people less than they're worth, and it's starting to hurt us. So that's one thing that we can kind of do to help. But that one's a difficult one too, because there are a lot of pressures coming from global competition. So people will say that trickle down doesn't work, has never. Well, but trickle down doesn't work though. But you kind of have to understand what they mean by trickle down. So the thing that's kind of funny about trickle down is that nobody serious believes in trickle down. Okay. Nobody believes that if you take, a bunch of government revenue and then you give that to the richest people, and all that wealth somehow trickles down and we all become more wealthy from. Nobody believes that. Nobody believes that. Okay. But we do believe that government expenditures as a percentage of GDP should be as low as we can get it, practically. That generally helps the economy. It's a slightly different sort of a thing, right? Because all you're saying is the government should only be allowed to be so big. If it gets too big, that's negative for the economy. That's very different from, okay, but what do you actually do with that revenue that the government isn't taking anymore? Right? Because if you do give rich people like directly money, because sometimes the government does that, right? Or like you give people stimulus checks. But like, what if they decided, oh, we're going to give people stimulus checks, but we're only going to give it to people that make more than $500,000 a year, right? Would that boost the economy? Probably not. The people that are wealthy, you give them money, they tend to just keep it, and then it becomes unproductive wealth, generally speaking. So trickle down doesn't work. Trickle down doesn't work. Now, I wouldn't say reduce government expenditures helps the economy. But we want government expenditures as a percentage of GDP to be less. This is different, right? Because what we could do is we could keep government expenditures generally, like we could cap them and keep them where they're at. And the economy should grow and we keep them at the same, and then that percentage would come down, for instance, right? Because there are people that are, you know, like being paid by the government and things like that. And so if you cut those things, then that will have a short-term negative impact to the economy, right? So it would be best if you can reduce government expenditures as a percentage of GDP without actually cutting any dollar amounts, right? So many TV spot, yeah. But we're just talking about general principles, right? You have to consider that once you look at those things and then we actually look at how they play out based off of certain things, it can be a completely different story, right? But there are some kind of like general high level things that we can say are pretty clear from the research. It's pretty clear from the research that a more progressive tax system benefits the economy, or rather, economies with a more progressive tax system grow faster. And that's the United States has the most progressive tax system in the world. So that's one thing. But then another thing is that the larger government expenditures are as a percentage of GDP, that hampers growth. So those are two general principles. That's different from like individual policies, right? Because some individual policies, now you come into the issues of complexity. Shame with the stimulus checks during the 19 event. It was all spent on shopping. So many TVs bought. Yeah. Well, it is really, it's kind of interesting to me that people have forgotten so quickly, isn't it? Because after COVID, and especially 2 years ago when like the inflation hit, right? Like one of the biggest narratives that we saw in the financial world was that this was egg in the face of modern monetary theorists and general liberal thought on things. That if we stimulate, you know, regular, you know, middle class Americans, that will help the economy. And we found out, no, actually, it doesn't do a darned thing. It makes inflation go up, and the middle class doesn't benefit from it because they almost immediately consume it. And that's not that's not like making a negative, you know, because we say that we buy TVs, right? But it's just the reality of the situation. It is that if you don't have a lot of capital, then when you're given more capital, you're likely to spend it on things that you need or want instead of saving it. And it's the people, because you save it when you don't really need it, right? Is GDP growth, so I am explicitly not using GDP growth percentage as like my growth. There could be multiple different measures of growth that have different positives and negatives. There are actually some really big problems with only looking at GDP as our measure of growth, okay? But we can look at like percentage of GDP, and then you can go on Fred and you can look up total government expenditures, right? And then say, what is total government expenditures as a percentage of GDP? Let me show you.
Order canceled.
You know, I would not expect the robot to be doing very well today. And it looks like, yep, it is not doing very well today. It's just kind of taking random shots in the dark, and they don't seem to match up with where I would want them to at all. Okay, here we are. Federal net outlays as percent of gross domestic product. And when we look at things, basically the only time that government expenditures as a percent of gross domestic product has been higher was during World War II. Right? Like even, well, like COVID really took it out, right? But now we've kind of come back, and we didn't come back to this 20%. And 20% kind of seems to be like the magic, the practical number, right? Like it's hard for you to get more than 20%. Obviously, you can have less than that, because before we were taxing income. Before income taxes, it was much less than that, right? We were at 10%. Okay. But then since then, despite the changes that they made, and despite the changes that they made, it's harder to get more than 20%. So that's the practical number. That's what I was saying. We know what the practical number is, but we don't know what the optimal number is. How would you determine what the optimal number is? I don't know. Why are the folk who are upset with COVID checks weren't equally upset with a 55? Because giving a $55 billion bailout to farmers has a higher multiple than giving people stimulus checks. So Keynesian economics. Well, a lot of Keynesian economics is basically about, okay, when we do a certain thing, we have a certain policy. What is the multiplier factor that has on growth? And we find that different policy attempts to, like, you know, if we're in a recession and what things do you do? We find that different policies have different multiples, and some are more effective than others. The one that is the most effective is unemployment. Without question, the multiplier on unemployment is like insane compared to everything else. So basically, you allow people to still have an income, because otherwise, like, spending just completely collapses. Okay, giving farmers money because of the trade war is a lot more like unemployment. Whereas giving people a stimulus check has one of the lowest multiples that you can have. And that's why we're upset. We're upset because everybody said that unemployment checks were not very effective. And then they did it, and we could see that, yes, they are not very effective. But, you know, here during this trade war stuff, if they needed to support farmers again so that, like, farms don't go out of business, I mean, it's not ideal. Obviously, there's a lot of things about a trade war that I don't like, but I would have to support that particular policy because it would help the economy. With straight welfare, sure, but it has a strong multiplier factor. Helps the economy. Like Donald Trump's first trade war, yeah, there was a lot of volatility in the market and everything. But like when we're coming back and looking at our charts, like the chart that we were just looking at, right? the trade war doesn't show up there. It's not even a blip. And part of that was because they had policies like the farmer bailout. Otherwise, it probably could have turned into something much worse. Yeah, farmers have massive debt, and if they went bankrupt, we would have a much bigger probably. You know, like part of the issue is so there's this whole thing like free market versus not, right? Because a lot of people, that's the way that they view the market, right? Is that we should just have a completely free market, and I think that that's stupid. Everything that we know about the market suggests that markets are prone to endogenous shocks, that if left to just go on their own, they will inevitably just completely explode and blow up and cause all sorts of problems. So you do have to manage it. You do have to manage it. But when you manage it, we're talking about a complex system. So the system doesn't always act the way that you want. And so what has happened is we've had all of these various policies for decades now that have created all sorts of chronic imbalances that any one of those, if you know, shit really hit the fan, could cause real problems. And farming is definitely one of those places. And then, interestingly enough, you have some countries, like in Europe, where they're like, oh, we're not hurting farmers enough. Let's screw with them even more. and they're starting to feel the impact of that. It was interesting that kind of drop in the treasuries, but I don't know. It was just kind of giving up what we had earlier. I don't know if I read too much into it. I mean, the bigger thing is, do we hold the gains in the S&P 500 going into the weekend or not? This is still the big question. So, I don't know. Like one of the issues here is that I am not necessarily trying to tell you, like, this is the way that the world should be. Instead, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, okay, if you see X problem, what is an actually effective way to go about solving that problem? So I'm not giving these examples as I think this is the way that the world should be, but really more as a demonstration about what I think is the kind of process that ends up being the most effective, right? Because ultimately, my job is not to tell people how it should be. My job is to help people understand how it is, how to best deal with how it is, and the kinds of strategies that you use to deal with that, including the kinds of strategies that you use to change it. With the idea that if I teach you the correct principles, that then you will come up with solutions that actually work. Because the issue is that they're complex systems, right? So first we have to understand what the problem actually is, and next we have to understand kind of the direction or style of strategies that kind of are effective at dealing with that. And then we have to actually, you know, do the agent-based modeling to model our actual solutions out and see how those work and the unintended consequences of those. Time to short a ZN? I don't know. Like, even though it's down a good clip and everything, the degree of imbalance isn't that much. So even though I think that there's a pretty good chance that we do break those lows, I don't know if the payout for it is really there. I don't know. More generally, I'm still just terrified to touch this market. To be honest with you. No, what's this? Vladimir Lebedia, Kraken's 1.5 Ninja Trader deal and local restrictions. End my journey on this platform. Oh. Interesting. Kind of sounds like local restrictions probably play a bigger factor. You know what's funny is I kind of wanted to argue about the Ukraine war, but we kind of run out of time for that. I'll only point out, you know, because I was saying, well, you know, the issue is that if you don't do something, you might lose the whole country. Like in all honesty, the best case scenario, if they don't make a peace deal, I think the best case scenario for Ukraine is that Russia continues to completely take over those breakaway provinces and stops there. That would be like the best case scenario for them. Right? But yesterday, Donald Trump saying, well, the incentive for Ukraine to make a deal there is that they don't lose the entire country. I don't think that's necessarily saying something that the president should say, because that does kind of weaken the Ukrainian position and help the Russian position. But like at this point, what are you supposed to do? I just don't think that Zelensky gets it, man. I think that he is a comedian. He is in the cut of like a social media star of sorts. And he was able to, the social media star, like getting everybody mobilized for a war, they're really, really good at that. But none of that stuff helps you in diplomacy. And it seems to me that Zelensky simply lacks the skills to get the job done when it comes to diplomacy. And I don't know what you can do to help him understand what the situation actually is. Because even if you assume all of the things that Zelensky says are correct, like that this was completely Russia's fault and that, they will continue to take over the entire continent, and so everybody should be as interested in stopping Russia as possible. Even if you say all of that is true, like the situation is as such that our options are kind of limited. And the idea that we're just going to take all that territory back is
Order canceled.
a joke, frankly. And Zelensky doesn't seem to get it. So I'm concerned about that. When crude market went upside down, it took Trump 10 minutes to sign that OPEC deal limiting oil production. He basically bailed out big oil. And you're talking about like when oil went negative. You need to run your algo across ZT, ZF as well as ZN. 2 out of 3 imbalances should be entry, maybe bigger size trade off of all 3 having an imbalance. Yeah, watching all 3 and trading off of an imbalance, I think would be a really good filter that would probably increase our accuracy. But I don't think it solves the bigger problem, right? The bigger problem is that the market will go through regimes where market orders dominate and where they don't. And the way that you can kind of tell that is like if we've had like a really big event, when that event happens, like that's the period when market orders really, really dominate. And then what happens is after that, the market maker's behavior changes, everybody's behavior changes, and it actually kind of favors the market maker. And so the question is, can we find a way to detect those regime changes technically? And my theory was that I might be able to detect it in the order flow itself by attaching different filters to it, or by just looking at how far into the expiration we are, how close we are to expiration. And my conclusion so far is that those things don't do it. I can seem to say what regime we are in myself, but I can't seem to express it technically. Like I you know, kind of figured, we would go back to this chart here of ZN, right? Through all of this, through basically up to here, where we're getting crazy volatility and everything. That was when the algorithm worked really, really well. And then you notice that we get into this mean reversion period, and it's like all of the sudden the volatility just completely falls off a cliff. Or like if we come in, we can look at it on a daily chart is probably a better way of looking at it, right? There's like huge volatility, and then followed by a period of unusually low volatility. Like when we have volatility, like right here, that volatility kind of trails off. What's with this one where it just like falls off a cliff? Well, it's because the market maker behavior changes, right? And when you're in this regime, that's when you need to do the opposite of the algo. So how do you express that? I'm not quite sure. Maybe it should just be based off of volatility, but I don't think that it completely correlates to volatility either. Maybe we could use some sort of machine learning system that uses a hidden Markov model to switch between them based on how well the strategy is doing. I don't know. Another question that I have about it though is, which side works more often? Because I kind of thought that the market orders one, in the long run does make more. At least that's what my backtesting showed, but I have very limited backtest, right? But this most recent market is making me think, actually, you're better off going with the limit orders. Unless something's happening. Unless you explicitly know something's happening. But it's just a guess. Yeah, VIX above 30, or when it's below a certain amount. I don't think I would use the VIX. I think that I would use standard deviation of the treasuries themselves. But yeah, when volatility is high or increasing, then I want to use market orders, and when it is low or decreasing, I want to use limit orders or something like that. Actually, that's not a bad way. I know I could test that too. But we only have 3 minutes. It's time for me to get going, man. Okay, guys. Well, it was good. I do want to spend more time programming some of this stuff, but you know, there's a lot to talk about right now. So, and there's going to be a lot to talk about next week when we get back into the economic releases. All right. So I don't know how I'll approach that, but we'll figure it out. Okay. You know, the day job is going well. I'm busy, and they sound happy. Of course, you never know. Like maybe they tell everybody that, but they sound really, really pleased with me so far. So yeah, GG. All right, guys. I will see you all on Monday. In the meantime, have a good weekend. Stay excellent, team.